Do you enjoy American Westerns? What about that peculiar little subgenre of Westerns, the sometimes inaccurately labeled gay cowboy movies like Brokeback Mountain and The Power of the Dog? Do you write steamy fanfiction about the outlaws from Red Dead Redemption? Do you wish you could find that same energy distilled into a visual novel, and give these poor guys a chance at an actual happy ending for once? Well, I don't, but I want to talk about Dead Man's Rest anyway. I might consider myself a connoisseur of gay dating sims, but westerns are pretty far outside my usual range. Not much about this setting is particularly relatable to me, whether it's the toxic masculinity, the religious self-loathing, or the mostly all-male communities scraping out an isolated living on the frontier. But Dead Man's Rest, a visual novel released last month by indie developer Argent Games, was surprisingly effective at getting me to step outside my comfort zone and enjoy some dark but ultimately uplifting stories of gay cowboys, with the requisite asterisk next to both of those labels, of course. It would be a stretch to call Dead Man's Rest a dating sim. It's structured like one, with the story splitting into different branches that each align with one of its love interests, but as is also the case with some of Argent Games' other projects, dating isn't the focus of the plot. The protagonist, a bounty hunter tracking a notorious outlaw, is fingered as a suspect in the murder of a small town's mayor, and now he has to track down the real culprit so he can get back to hunting the outlaw. The question of who did kill the mayor has a different answer in each route, which is a good way to keep the story feeling fresh over multiple playthroughs. But it's impossible not to notice that some of the solutions the game offers seem more plausible and better thought out than others. I wouldn't really call that a drawback, however, because the plot of Dead Man's Rest does the work it needs to in order to set up its romantic storylines, and along the way, touch upon many of the harsh realities of the late 19th century American West, including racism, substance abuse, violence, sexual assault, chronic illness, and everything else mentioned in this game's lengthy content warning. That's something to be mindful of if you're looking to check it out yourself, but I do think Dead Man's Rest transcends much of that bleakness in its good endings, which, as I joked about earlier, is more than you can say for most other gay cowboy media. Now on that subject, there's also a lot of the sort of homophobia you'd be likely to see in a western. More than one of the love interests grapples with deep self-loathing over their attraction to men, or with its prickly legal nature in a time and place where sodomy was technically a crime but was rarely punished as such. The secret fifth route especially goes to some very dark places there, but that route is locked until your second playthrough, so at least no one has to worry about stumbling across that the first time through. Despite the sincere effort at historical realism, though, I do have to question why most of the game's queer cast eventually come around to sexuality as a core element of their identity, when in the late 19th century sexual orientation was only just beginning to be conceptualized that way, and when, as I understand it, sexual activity among men in the American West at the time was more common than is represented by pop culture, but also wasn't framed by its participants as gay in the way that we understand that label today. Some characters even use the term homosexual, even though that word was coined just 10 years before Dead Man's Rest is set, and it's doubtful that it would have been in common usage in rural American communities at the time. My guess is that this was a concession to genre on the part of the writer, that even if you're angling for realism, it's simpler to craft stories that parse as romantic to contemporary audiences if you have the characters think of sexuality in more contemporary terms. Besides, having the characters say they're shacking up just because men have needs and there aren't many women on the frontier just isn't appealing, no matter how you slice it, so I can suspend my disbelief on that point. On the other hand, the lack of attention given to the game's very few female characters or to the nearby Native American reservation is half period-appropriate misogyny and racism, and half the sort of conservation of detail that's typical of dating sims. If you're not the main character or a love interest, you can count yourself lucky if you even get a unique portrait, much less anything resembling actual development. Still, I don't want to sound down on Dead Man's Rest for having the same issues as virtually every other game like it out there, not when the overall writing quality carries it beyond its modest presentation. This is one of the only dating sims I've ever played where the routes I enjoyed most were not the ones I thought I'd like going in, which I'd say speaks to the ability of Dead Man's Rest to emotionally resonate even where I wasn't necessarily expecting it. This is also one of the few examples of the genre I played that isn't explicit, to the extent that I'm confident that I could show you any CG from this game without YouTube taking it down for being too sexy. In spite of that, though, I never really felt that absence, because of the way in which Dead Man's Rest handles its mature content. The game is clearly unafraid to foreground sex as a part of its narrative, but its tone is also so consistently serious and even grim that outright porn scenes would have been out of place. Not that I wouldn't be willing to pay for an explicit patch if Argent Games added one down the line, incidentally, but the story feels complete even without that element. Also, put a pin in the subject of non-explicit dating sims, because I'm going to be revisiting that topic in a future video, and I think Dead Man's Rest will be worth a name drop when I get there. That is, however, going to be it for this video. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoyed this little review and would like to check out Dead Man's Rest yourself, I put a link to its Steam page down in the description. Likes and comments are always appreciated, and if you're new to this channel and want to see me talk more about other gay dating sims in the future, be sure to subscribe, because I've got a couple of more videos coming up where I'll be delving further into the genre as part of my project for Pride this year. There is, in particular, an older but much better known dating sim that I'll be playing for the first time in the coming weeks, as a way of finally reckoning with the considerable hype surrounding it. And I anticipate some interesting reactions to that one. God help me.